Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Bertha Coombs. I am a healthcare reporter with CNBC, and joining us today is Ai-jen Poo, who is an author, and also, I would basically say you are a major caregiver advocate.
Yes, that is a great way to describe what I do. I'm the president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and the executive director of Caring Across Generations, and we advocate for caregivers.
And you also helped found a Caregivers Union in New York back in 2010, because there are so many there who really needed a voice.
Yes, I mean, there are 2.2 million domestic workers who work as nannies and caregivers in the private pay, gray market all over the country, and about 9 million professional care workers across childcare and direct care. Some of them are unionized, some of them are in organizations, but most of them are not.
You know, as a business reporter, I always gravitate towards data. I think that's a great place to kind of anchor the story. And the numbers are incredible, especially when we look at boomers like me. So all of us will be 65 by the end of the decade. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's incredible to me, you're talking about roughly 75 million people. And the first wave of boomers will start turning 80 next year. So you'll get about 22 million boomers turning 80 next year. And that's really when people start needing more help, the majority of people, in terms of home care or someone to help and come and look in on them. But when you look at the growing need because of that demographic shift, when you look at the Census Bureau and BLS, they say that we're going to see a 22% increase in the need for home health aides over the next 5 years. And that is exceeding any other part of the economy in terms of jobs. But we're going to be at least 3 million short. And that sounds really low to me.
It is low. It is low. I mean, what we have is a country where every single day, 10,000 of us turn 65 and 10,000 babies are born. And so across the generational spectrum, we need more care than ever before. And as you said, we're living longer than ever before. So we've added an entire generation onto our lifespan in this country without adapting any of our systems or policies to support quality of life for longer. And so we don't have universal, any kind of long-term care benefit in this country. We don't have a child care program that allows for everyday working people to afford child care. We don't have paid family and medical leave. We're one of the few countries in the world that has no federal paid family medical leave program. What we have is 53 million overstretched family caregivers and parents, and 9 million underpaid professional care workers who can hardly sustain in their jobs. There's a social scientist named Jessica Calarco who says other countries have a safety net and the US has women. And so we're underprepared for sure, and it's actually a crisis that's been simmering for some time, and I think COVID and the pandemic really kind of awakened the country to the fact that we can be doing the very best we can as individuals, but without systems and policies and a culture that supports care, we're going to be in a kind of treading water and oftentimes sinking situation.
What's happening to improve it? Because you talk about, obviously, care workers deserve to be paid because it is literally God's work that they do, whether it's caring for our children or caring for the elderly. But at the same time, it's difficult for people who need to hire care workers. So, there's a study that recently came out that when it comes to childcare costs for a family with 2 children now exceed rent in all 50 states. All 50 states, right? So even if you're working and you are fortunate enough to, make 6 figures, that's still a big, big chunk.
Oh, yeah. No, the numbers don't add up. Right? The average cost of childcare is more than 10 grand per child per year. The average cost of a nursing home stay for a year is over 90 grand per year. And 60% of working Americans earn less than $60,000 per year. So the vast majority of us, it literally does not add up. So people are having to make impossible choices between working and caring for the people they love. And that just shouldn't be the case in this country. And the fortunate thing is that there actually are policy solutions. It's not a mystery in terms of what we can do. There are bills in Congress, and in fact, during the pandemic, as a part of our American Rescue Plan that passed through Congress and was signed by the president, we actually staved off some of the worst potential crises in our care systems by investing federal dollars in childcare to keep childcare centers open and keep providers working. We invested in Medicaid home and community-based services to make sure that we could hold the home care workforce that's so essential and was such an essential lifeline to some of the people most vulnerable to the COVID virus. And so $37 billion was invested in Medicaid home and community-based services. And Congress was nervous, and the White House was nervous that it would be a partisan issue and not every state would take up that funding from Medicaid. And all 50 states took that funding. And 37 of them have used the funding to enhance wages, either offer bonuses or give raises to the home care workforce, which, by the way, earns a median income of $21,000 per year, caring for the people we love. And so we can actually make the wages better. We can make these jobs better. We know how to do it. We've started to do it in these incremental ways. And I believe that we are the generation that is going to transform our caregiving systems for the 21st century. There's no choice. We just have to do it if we're going to have the support that we need. It's almost like infrastructure for this era. I think Senator Casey said it best. He said, some people need a bridge or a tunnel to get to work, and others of us need childcare, and others of us need home care. And that's our reality. We just have to really accept it and take the action that we need.
And one of the things that I think about is just that cost trade-off if you're a worker.
Right.
So if you're in California now, you could go flip burgers at McDonald's for $20 an hour.
That's right.
And it's a heck of a lot easier than dealing for someone. I think for a lot of people, being a home care worker is really a vocation. But at the same time, it's very understandable that someone would say, look, I'm going to do this and I can work overtime and I can make more because I have to provide for my family.
Yeah.
So yes, we want to give workers higher wages, but if you're the one paying, I will tell you, when I was paying for my mom before she passed, it was hard suddenly when at the end she needed 24-hour care.
That's right. And
all of a sudden, was paying $30 an hour, whereas before I'd been paying closer to $20. And one of the care workers who I was able to find, because my mom in her dementia, my family's Cuban, and my mom in her dementia spoke mostly Spanish. Unless you spoke to her in Spanish, then she'd speak to you in English. It's just one of those things that she would do, but because she was funny that way. But I needed a Spanish-speaking person who would be able to be there with her overnight. And this woman, she herself was on public assistance. She had, subsidized housing, and so she couldn't earn too much. So she said, if you don't mind, can you just pay me off the books? And I said, sure. Because, she was the right person that I needed, and I understood her situation.
Right. No, this is the conundrum, is that a third of all home care workers are reliant on public assistance just to make ends meet. So they're working full-time or more sometimes and still cannot meet their basic needs for food, housing. We have a member named Deborah from Georgia, and she believes that care work is her calling. And if those of you who know home care providers or home health aides or child care providers know that you don't do care work for the money. It is really a calling for the people, and it's skilled work, it's difficult work, and she really saw it as her calling, and she was earning $9 an hour in Georgia, and she was in a small town where it takes sometimes 30, 40 an hour long to get between clients. And it also costs, the prices of gas, right, went up. So she was at a point where she couldn't afford gas to get to her clients and food for her family and the rent staying in this job. So she took a $15 an hour job in manufacturing and left the profession, and it broke her heart. And she still comes to our membership meetings because she wants to identify still as a care worker. And fortunately, we just won a wage increase for direct care workers in the state of Georgia this year. So we're hoping that she'll be able to come back to the work. But this is how dire it is. We're losing our best caregivers. I mean, this woman is like the Beyonce of care. I mean, she just was born to do care work. And the fact that she's in a manufacturing job instead of helping to support us is, I think, one of the biggest crises and heartbreaks of this time. And we can change that. Just like we in this country turned manufacturing jobs in the 1930s and 40s, they used to be dangerous sweatshop jobs that were poverty wage jobs. A lot of immigrants did that work. And we turned those jobs into the biggest on-ramp to economic mobility and a middle class in the history of the world. Care jobs, jobs that can't be outsourced or automated, these are our opportunity to create that pathway out of poverty into the middle class, into economic mobility, into generational wealth building again. We just have to decide to make that investment in care. And we came so close. The House of Representatives actually passed a bill called the Build Back Better Act that included generational investments in our caregiving systems and programs, from childcare to Medicaid, home and community-based services, to establishing for the first time 4 weeks paid family medical leave. We came a couple of US senators short in the Senate from getting across the finish line, but it goes to show that it's possible, and this is the time before we get to that moment where we're all over 80 and needing care and struggling to find a Deb, right?
Because AI is not going to do it for us, I'm pretty sure.
I mean,
not going to be there to change your bed.
Right. No, I think as of in the pandemic, I read about a lab in Silicon Valley that was trying to build a robot to fold a towel, and they were at it for 12 years and still hadn't cracked the code. So, I mean, let's see.
You know, you talked about immigration, and we know that there are immigration programs for highly skilled workers, H-1 visas.
Right.
One of the areas that this impasse over immigration impacts is caregiving, because when you look at caregiving, if anyone goes to a senior living, the majority of people who are doing that work are immigrants. Also, when it comes to caring for children as well, they're often immigrant women. Right. So is there any discussion to try to figure out how there could be some kind of work visa for people at this level of work?
Yes, there is a discussion about this. And it's a good thing, because already, as it stands, 1 out of every 4 direct care workers is an immigrant. And 1 out of 4 child care workers is an immigrant. And so there's no way in this country today that we would be able to even have the patchwork systems we have and sustain them without an immigrant workforce. And when we look into the future, as our demands and pressures for care increase, especially this phenomenon of the sandwich generation. How many people are in the panini right now? Yeah. Okay, you're right. Sandwich is too gentle a metaphor. It's like the pressure is like more panini-esque. Yeah. But seriously, I think there is no way that we're going to address this need without including immigrants in the vision for the future of care. It's just an all hands on deck situation. We're going to need family, friends, neighbors. We're going to need a strong workforce, and that workforce is going to need to be citizens and non-citizens alike. And I think it's a huge opportunity, actually.
But is there anywhere where they're talking about that, whether in Washington or in state houses?
So all immigration policy has to happen in Washington. And last week, the president enacted a measure to offer work authorization and a pathway to citizenship for 500,000 undocumented immigrants who are married to U.S. citizens, who are part of mixed status families. And among that 500,000 are a huge number of family caregivers and also some professional care workers. There's another rule that's being discussed that's called the caregiver rule, to allow for family caregivers. There's another 3 million of them who are here without status, with no pathway to legalize their status and get work authorization, to offer them work authorization, which is an equivalent to a visa, and to be able to legalize their status. So that would be a game changer in terms of supporting families. Literally tomorrow it could happen. And we just have to really say that we want it to happen. And I think people in Washington are looking at that right now. But then I think Congress, there are in every state in the country, because of the workforce crisis, legislators from Alabama, from all kinds of states all over the country are clamoring for a work visa for immigrants. And what we're working on developing right now is a bill that would go through Congress that would offer both an opportunity to legalize the people who are here, already interested and or currently doing care work in the shadows of our economy, to get on a pathway to work authorization and citizenship through training, and then also include a visa future flow program for people to be able to come in the future as well, but with standards, so that we can continue to raise the standard of quality in terms of the jobs for this work, for care work, and also the quality of care.
We're not the only country that is experiencing rapid aging, so we say.
It's true.
Are there other countries where it is working and there is an infrastructure that we can learn from?
There are many other countries in the global north that have long-term care benefits that are connected to their healthcare systems. Germany, the UK has a version, Canada, Japan certainly, and many other countries have affordable childcare programs. In Canada, there's a cap on the amount of money you pay per day for childcare. It's a $10 per day cap. Can you imagine? I know Americans are like,
what, $300 a month? Really?
Yeah.
I think you'd have to pay more for that for someone to walk your dog in New York City.
I know. But I was recently able to visit Bogota, Colombia. And what I found in Bogota was so inspiring. The former mayor of Bogota, Claudia Lopez, she put into place a program called Care Blocks. Has anybody ever heard of this program? Ah, yay. Okay, we need to spread the good word about this program, because essentially what she did was she did a survey of all families in the city, and she found that there are about 1.2 million family caregivers living in poverty who are trapped in poverty in the city because they don't have the time or ability to access the kind of services that would help them economically, like take a GED course or get access to healthcare services or any number of services. And so what she did was she mapped out the parts of the city where there are high densities of family caregivers living, and she centralized all government-funded services in those places and created a setup where you can come with a person in your care could be a person with a disability, an older adult, or a child, and that person will have programming at the care blocks while you also drop off your laundry and someone does it for you. And then you can attend classes. I visited computer classes, GED classes, financial literacy classes. You can also get checkups, you can get therapy, you can do yoga classes, and I saw an aquatic dance class where 70 caregivers were living their best life in this aquatic dance class, and then right behind them in a kiddie pool, the kids were learning how to swim.
So
And
how do
it
they...
makes so much sense.
It makes sense, but I think about if you propose that here, someone's going to say, how do we pay for it? Where's the return on that investment?
So one is it's put a whole bunch of caregivers to work because they've been in these, there are also these job placement services and all kind with the GED programs, all people are now more eligible to work, and there are more resources for childcare in these facilities as well. And so in terms of return on investment, the women's labor force participation has been a huge indicator of opportunity. And then, and they actually just reorganized the services that were there and then leveraged private sector partnerships, and they centralized city-funded services, state-funded services, and federally funded services. So it was basically about half creating efficiencies in existing programs and half leveraging actual strategy that centered caregivers. Because a lot of people, when they talk to companies, for example, the laundry services that they offer, donated by private sector, and they found that when they went to the private sector with this plan, people wanted to help. So this is a problem that the market cannot solve alone. If it could, we would all be in a very different position. But it is about an active role for government and everyone coming together in a way that says this is a societal-wide priority, and we're going to design for care. We're going to design in a way that puts caregivers' needs and the people who will rely on care at the center, and it changes things. It actually creates some efficiencies, right, in how we design things.
You know, you talk about the private sector, and the private sector has finally woken up. It's taken years, but now most large employers do offer parental leave, not just for moms, and it doesn't just have to be your disability leave for you know, having actually given birth, not if you've adopted a child. So dads can be part of this too, to take some time off. But it seems as though they're still not quite there when it comes to childcare in particular, right, for their workers, which astounds me that they build these new campuses and build these new buildings, but they don't do on-site childcare. Right. They have gyms, they have food, and if you go in Silicon Valley, you never have to leave those campuses because they have everything there, all the services there. Not childcare, though. Do you talk to some of these large companies to rethink what they can do? Because oftentimes these large companies really lead on a lot of benefits.
Yes, and actually just want to shout out that next week the Department of Commerce is hosting a childcare summit for large companies and others to talk about this very issue. And I don't know how many of you are following the CHIPS Act actually requires that businesses that get government grants offer childcare for their employees. And I think that it's these kinds of steps, these kinds of measures that will start to shift and move the dial in the private sector. And we need leadership. We need bold leadership, and we need partnership. And I just want to say that the vast majority of working people, 2/3 of all minimum wage workers are women. And the majority of those workers are moms. And it is in those jobs where people don't have paid leave, don't have access to benefits. And so there is a way in which some of how this benefits evolution and revolution is happening is just not reaching the places where we need it the most. And so that's where I just want us to think about, how do we make sure that the working people of this country, especially those working in low-wage jobs, are actually being touched by these policy priorities? How do we make sure that paid family and medical leave, right now, 1 out of every 4 moms has to return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. And our friends at Every Mother Counts, there's going to be a panel this afternoon we should all go to hear more about the maternal health crisis in this country. Not having paid family medical leave is a part of it. And so I just think this is more than the private sector's leadership alone. We need systemic and policy change too.
Are you hopeful that we'll get it? Because it seems as though there is actually bipartisan support on these issues.
There is.
But, you know, we basically have a Congress that is like a poorly run preschool.
She said it, not me.
It just seems as though there's no will to actually put things forward. It's so dysfunctional.
No, it's true, but it's also, we have come together at times, and I will say that this wage increase that just happened in Georgia is like Georgia is a state that is not known for labor policy, right? We can make things happen. Washington State has the first ever long-term care benefit in the country called Washington Cares, and starting in 2026, it will start actually paying out funds to people above Medicaid eligibility, people who need long-term care and earn too much money in order to be eligible for Medicaid, and that's like most of us, right? The fact that in order to get any kind of long-term care, we have to completely impoverish ourselves in order to be eligible is one of the biggest drivers of inequality that nobody talks about. And it's only going to be worse. And so Washington State leading the way there. They also have this incredible home care training fund that trains 40,000 home care workers per year in 12 different languages. It's incredible. So Washington State is a state to look at. New Mexico just passed a citizen-led ballot initiative to permanently fund childcare in its state budget. So we can do these things, and it's requiring citizen action. It's requiring us actually calling for these things and demanding, advocating for care policy. And that's a real shift. That's what's new, and that's what's possible in this generation. I think most of us have grown up in a country where we see care as kind of a personal responsibility, right? And if we struggle to afford it or manage it, we consider it a bit of a personal failure, right? That we didn't save enough, we didn't buy long-term care insurance in time, we don't have the right job, we're a bad mom, a bad daughter. There's all these stories. But how could it be that 300 million of us failed, right? If it's experienced at that scale, there has to be some kind of a system failure here. And the more of us start talking about it that way and calling for solutions that reach across the country, through our systems, I think that's what's going to make the difference in this era.
You know, the difficult thing is, again, getting back to the demographics. You were talking about her friend writing the book about, you know, the next 50 and living to 100.
Yes, Deb Whitman. There she is.
There she is.
She is the head of policy at the AARP and has been studying these issues from every standpoint, from the caregiver standpoint, from as an economist, as a policy expert, working on the Hill, and she's coming out with an incredible book called The Second 50, that is really diving into the culture changes and the policy changes that we can start to embrace in order to improve life in this next period.
Because most of us cannot afford to live to 100, even if, you know, we have the benefit of being healthy enough.
That's right. And the thing that we all forget is that aging is living. Like, it's a good thing. But we do have to design for it, for a different, longer lifespan. We have to make some changes so that we can afford it. And not just afford it to kind of get by, but to live well as we age.
It's definitely something that people have been working on for a while. I know with the ACA, they wanted to include a long-term care provision because it was pretty clear that it's not something most people in this country can afford, and yet they couldn't reconcile the math because it's very expensive.
It is very expensive, but you know what? It's already really expensive. Like $90,000 a year, that's expensive. And most people can't afford it. And poverty is also expensive. Like the cost of not building these systems, I mean, I think I read a data point, and Deb will know, that 70% of our waste in the healthcare system happens at end-of-life healthcare with unnecessary rehospitalizations and institutionalizations. And the best prevention is actually caregiving, good caregiving. Like if we empowered frontline home care workers to be a part of our care teams, who are our eyes and ears anyway, to actually be a part of the solution, the amount of savings in the healthcare system alone, I think could fund a new part to Medicare. I mean, I don't know the math. Definitely. But I mean, it's a lot of money that gets wasted.
It is a lot. I will tell you, just anecdotally, the caregivers at my mom's senior center where she lived, they were the ones who made it work out so that initially, when she only needed a few hours a day, basically everyone would share the caregivers. And so, someone would get a few hours, someone would get a few hours, and they would get their full day in.
Yeah.
And no one would have to pay that full freight when they didn't necessarily need a full day of caregiving. And that was the caregivers themselves who came up with that system there. And if one of them couldn't make it, they had another one who would come in their place and would stay in touch with you. And that was them. That wasn't a system that figured it out.
Yeah. There is a certain kind of genius that caregivers have that I think is deeply undervalued. And if we leaned in and supported both family caregivers and professional caregivers and really invested in and lifted up, listened to that genius, I think so much potential could be unleashed.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of mm-hms and seeing some bouncing heads. So I want to open it up to you all if you have some questions that you want to ask that we haven't gotten to. So we've got folks with microphones in the audience. Woman over here.
Hello? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. This is amazing. I saw Claudia recently at the Harvard Kennedy School through a board I'm on.
Mayor Lopez.
Yes, Mayor Lopez.
She's incredible.
What you describe is incredible. And I'm just curious, what other innovations do you hope for, that you want to see or that you've seen sort of room for innovation? We talked about the corporate world, and especially in the professionalization, I've noticed a lot of we're in a new need, with management of screen time with kids and with working parents, and demands on school. There's other needs for the caretaking, and what do you see at this kind of macro level is important?
Well, I see a lot of support for caregivers in terms of learning about building tools around mental health, which I think is really, really important. We actually, years ago here, we partnered with Second City to design an improv for caregivers course. Because in watching how they do improv training at Second City, we felt like there were a lot of skills that you learn in improv in terms of presence and agility and connection and yes and. right? In dementia care, they always tell you, just yes it, And so I think that just bringing in creative ways of nurturing the genius of caregivers, whether it's improv and tapping into that, I think is part of the innovation. I also just want to name that there are, I think, 6 million family caregivers caring for loved ones with Alzheimer's or other dementias, and we need a wholly different kind of support infrastructure for those in that position. And it really it's almost like we have to really think about care in squads. And so a lot of innovations that are about supporting the partnership and creating structures for partnership between family members, friends, and professionals in the care team. I think that's the future. There's some great care navigators out there who are innovating systems for that. Making care a collective endeavor, embracing that. Care was never meant to be an isolated project, ever. And so the more we reclaim and design for care as a collective endeavor, both in our families and communities, and also in society, I think that's the future.
Young woman here with the black jacket.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. I'm still a little bit stuck on the maths bit, right? Just wondering, have you come across any national level study on the cost, the total cost that would have to be funded if we were to properly fund both childcare and elderly care with proper compensation? And where I'm coming from is, if we know that total, then we know the gap, then we know how much money we've got, then we know how much efficiency we need to strike.
Yeah. I'm actually going to see if Deb.
I'm going to pass the baton.
No, yeah. But could we give Deb the mic for a second? No? Just what you know about long-term care, maybe. Anything. Yeah.
It's nice to have phone a friend, isn't it?
Hi, I'm Deb Whitman with AARP. I don't know anything about childcare costs. As Ai-jen said, the cost for care depends on the setting. So nursing homes are $100,000 per year per person. Home care is
a third
of that, which is why a lot of Medicaid programs are rebalancing. The care that that family members do is, Ai-jen, you know that number.
Is estimated at $600 billion per year.
So the question is, are we replacing all of the family care in which you add that to it? So we can talk. They're huge.
It's a hard number to capture.
It's a hard number. They're big, but we're also losing because so many people are out of the workforce that could be in the workforce.
Yeah.
We're also losing because if we paid people better, they would have a greater tax revenue. So I don't know if we've seen a whole economic model that takes all the puts and the gives and makes the assumptions about both quality of life as well as the costs. So I think that's worth doing.
Absolutely.
And on this side, woman here.
Hi, everyone. I know Deb. I'm Ellen Fien from McKinsey Health Institute, so I have a good solution.
Oh, good. Excellent. McKinsey with the solution.
It's a very high-level number, but we look at societal participation of older adults in the US and how that could contribute to the economy. So at the moment, we have 17% of people over the age of 55 who are currently not working who want to work. If you were to be able to match them with good employment, that would be $1.3 trillion and a 7.2% uplift to the GDP. So that's your answer. Many of those.
But why aren't they working? Is it because they have caregiving conflicts, or
no? We manage people at the age of 50 in America out of the workforce, and that's why we've got a lot of entrepreneurs and people who run their own businesses that are actually in the older age group rather than the younger age group because they get kicked out of corporate America. So it's purely they can't find a good opportunity. So if we could do better matching, we'd be able to solve it. So there is the economic benefit is there. And we have then looked at what the economic benefit of releasing people from direct caregiving in the home if they could have a replacement opportunity like what you described in Colombia. So the money is there, the economics can work, and then the secondary benefit or the primary benefit for those individuals is that they are going to be healthier for longer because they have an active role in society and don't have the sometimes lonely role of being the caregiver, and they may not be equipped or have the appetite for that role.
Thank you so much for chiming in on that. I do want to say one thing that we've seen that should give us all so much hope is that these issues historically have not been understood as economic issues, right? It's like it's always been in the women's agenda or the some other agenda. And the Biden-Harris administration has made caregiving a core pillar of their economic agenda. And it's holistic. They talk about childcare, they talk about aging and disability care, they talk about paid family medical leave, and they talk about better wages and good jobs for care workers. And so we've now moved this from a kind of siloed, marginal set of policy ideas to now the center of the economic conversation, which is long overdue. But that should give us hope, because if we now are taking this part of this $600 and some billion part of the economy seriously, which, by the way, is larger than the entire pharmaceutical sector, if we can take this part of the economy seriously, it also means that we can take these policy solutions seriously, that we can actually design things differently, and we can start building the systems we need. And the ball is rolling. We just have to kind of keep pushing. That's the work of this generation.
There's a gentleman here in the back.
Very next.
Hey, thank you so much. Oh, up here. All right, up here. Beto from Austin. I love the emphasis on the economics of it. About it, higher. I think they can hear me.
Yeah,
Good.
we hear him.
So when you think about the economics, about 100 years ago, 1920, the Fed Treasury passed, as part of the tax bill, that group insurance was excluded from the income tax base, which puts $1 trillion today in the hands of employers. And so what we really don't have is a free market. So when you talk about the private sector having limitations in doing better, it's because the free market will isn't there. I mean, employers and payers make choices on behalf of all of us. 90% of all care choices are made way before we even choose what kind of care we want. So when we think about the economics, there's so much potential that consumers can have if they were to be able to choose among all the options how they wanted to pursue their health. Any indication whether or not those conversations are actually happening? It's an unwinding of a 100-year-old tax provision, but it seems like 1920s, who here thought about health insurance the way it looks like today? There was no health insurance plans. And so it just seems like such an outdated model that all of our economics are predicated on. It's just that simple sometimes.
The health insurance model is shifting to a certain extent. The ACA has certainly created a more robust individual market, and that is helping with people who are getting kicked off of Medicaid rolls now that we've had the end of the pandemic pause. So many of them are able to transition, but not all of them. The hope is that there could be a much more smooth sort of transition, that in the same way as you get older, you go from your employer plan to Medicare, that you can do the same on ACA. That paying pre-insurance is so critical and is the benefit that we all get through our insurers. We don't pay for that benefit in terms of taxes. And people on the ACA are now getting that same kind of subsidy, but not all of them. And depending on where you are on the income spectrum, if you are higher, you're not getting as much of a benefit as someone who is much lower. So that's something that everyone's debating. And obviously we do have some of those benefits that are about to expire. So we'll see what happens in the next Congress, whether they take it on and expand it or leave it on pause, kick it down the road, as they seem to do with a lot of things that are hard problems to solve. But yeah, the insurance part is difficult. But long-term care is totally separate from that, and you would think that perhaps it should all be together. But again, as you try to look at the cost, look at how many long-term care insurers have had to cut back, because initially they priced it at a certain rate and they realized, oh, people are using this much more than we thought. And particularly when you have a cohort in the United States, you get a lot of people who are over 65 who have a number of comorbidities, whether it's diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, obesity. And so they do require a lot more healthcare. And that has become a bigger problem and a bigger issue when it comes to financing long-term care for a lot of folks.
When it comes to long-term care, every time I speak at a conference, always somebody from a private insurance company comes up to me afterwards and says, I totally agree with you. This is a problem that the market can't solve. And our product is trash and we're trying to get out of it. And like, the government should deal with this. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I have a long-term care plan because I did a story on it when I was 40, and I said, wow, I don't have children. I'm not going to have anyone to care for me. So, but I will get maybe, I think it's up to $150 a day, which who knows by the time 25 years from now when I might need it, whether that's going to be anywhere near adequate. At any rate, Nana, here in the front.
Thank you. Two of the things that struck, my name is Nana Fomanen. I am Chief Medical Innovation Officer for Shared Harvest and a fellow Commonwealth Fund Fellow in Minority Health Policy, and an ER physician. I call myself a recovering ER physician because the two things that struck with me was when you quoted the amount of money you pay after having 2 children, over exceeding your mortgage or rent sometimes. And the idea that, we look at childcare through economics lens, and we're at Aspen Health, it's a healthcare lens, it's a social driver of health lens. And I think it also connects us across socioeconomics because everybody needs caregiving in some extent. And I think sometimes we get deep into the numbers and forget the stories. So I wanted to share a story that happened. And for those who are physicians in this group, I'm an ER physician, and I was taught early in my career that you need to stack your shifts before you plan to have a child. And so in my mind, thinking, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna get childcare. And I was part of a club of losing my mother early in my career, so didn't have family support. And I was like, okay, 8 years in, we're gonna do this. I'm stacking my shifts. And 30 weeks, I got sick and I got hospitalized and I was out of the game. And I remember so much what you said about feeling like a personal failure because here I was being irresponsible with my child. Maybe I should have worked more shifts early on in the trimester versus later, mid-trimester. And it was just so jarring. And I remember just being depressed, like I'm coming out of this with even more debt and not enough time off to be with my child. And then the COVID pandemic hit and all these resources happened for health professionals and it was amazing. And then they took it all away and gave us pizza parties. And what was jarring is the workforce, like now we say the statistics, 34% of the healthcare workers are burnt out and on drive. And many of them are women. We're just like, I could do better raising my child myself than all this struggle. So I think, going back to the question of like, what are the numbers? How do we make the argument? I'm like, right now, healthcare crisis, the workforce crisis, is the argument. And it ties into how we take care, what kind of healthcare services are available, who are available to take care of our elderly population, and like all of these things are tied into how do we care for each other? How do we care for the workforce? And then how do we care for our aging population? So I wish we can think about it holistically and not drive it to like, I just need to get the numbers down.
Yeah.
That is a wonderful note on which to end. Thank all of you for your contribution to this conversation, and Ai-jen, thank you so much for the work that you do.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.